Hello, this is the Global News podcast from the BBC World Service with reports and analysis from across the world. The latest news 7 days a week. BBC World Service podcasts are supported by advertising.
Hi there, I'm Namulanta Kombo and I'm the host of another BBC World Service podcast called Dear Daughter. Maybe you've listened to our first season, or maybe you heard about us a few months ago when we won Best Podcast of the Year at the British Podcast Awards. I am so excited to tell you we are coming back for our second season, but I need your help. I'll be back to tell you more after this episode.
This is the Global News podcast from the BBC World Service. I'm Andrew Peach, and in the early hours of Thursday, the 27th of October, these are our main stories. Iranian security forces have opened fire on protesters in several cities, marking 40 days since the death in custody of Mahsa Amini. President Putin has personally observed annual exercises conducted by Russian nuclear forces. There's been a further rise in the number of Ebola cases in Uganda, where 30 people have died. Also in this podcast,
we are standing here beside a miracle. It's a tea growing out of doors, probably the furthest north that tea has ever grown outside.
But where is this miracle? Find out later. Let's start in Iran. Wednesday marked 40 days since the death of Mahsa Amini, an Iranian woman whose death in the custody of the morality police sparked anti-government protests across the country. Mourners poured onto the streets of Saqqez, Amini's home city, to be met with tear gas. Iranian forces are also reported to have opened fire on protesters. Activists say there are now fresh protests across Iran. Live ammunition was used in Tehran and several cities across the northwest. There have been protests from schoolgirls shouting, "Death to the dictator," to students clapping at Tehran's Rafsanjani University. I've been speaking to Siavash Ardalan from BBC Persian, who started by telling me about those protests in Mahsa Amini's home city.
There weren't many confrontations reported there because the cemetery was basically out of town. But you had video images surfacing on social media showing many people, oceans of people just rushing towards the area where Mahsa Amini was buried. Then around the country, as the hours went by, people heard the news of this, so they then took to the streets, and what we had was very reminiscent of the initial weeks following Mahsa Amini's death in dozens of cities and towns across Iran. People were out in the streets. There were clashes with security forces, tear gas, firing directly with live bullets into the people. We haven't heard any news yet of how many people may have been killed, but overall human rights groups are saying up to now in the past 40 days up to 250 people at least may have been killed so far.
We're now seeing younger people, school pupils and students starting to join these protests, as we've been hearing. Tell me about the attack on the shrine.
So as all this was happening and still is underway, still we're getting images that the protests are happening in different cities very well into the night. Around 5:45 p.m. local time, news came out that an attack took place by armed assailants against a Shia mosque, a Shia shrine in the city of Shiraz. The government's line was very contradictory at first. First they said it was one assailant, and then they said there were a few, and then again they said there was one assailant, and they released a video of a gunman who appeared to be entering the shrine, but without a face covering, without a mask, interestingly, and said that it was the work of Sunni militants. And shortly after, ISIS claimed responsibility for this. Now we're still trying to verify the authenticity of this claim. It seems to be an authentic claim. Now we do know that ISIS usually takes credit for attacks that it hasn't carried out. But in this instance, it sounded very worrying because it kind of reminded people ominously of what happened in Syria or in Iraq, where suddenly Sunni militant forces came into the mix and just the situation became explosive. And this is what a lot of people are scared of. But then the protesters were very skeptical of the government accounts.
And that was Siavash Ardalan from BBC Persian. President Putin has overseen exercises involving Russia's nuclear forces. State television showed footage of Mr. Putin watching the drills from a control room. There have been growing fears of an escalation of the war in Ukraine after Russia claimed Kiev was preparing to detonate a radioactive bomb, an accusation which Ukraine and its Western allies have strongly rejected. Our Russia editor Steve Rosenberg reports from Moscow.
It was a routine exercise, but at a time of heightened tension between Russia and the West. Addressing President Putin, Russia's Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu declared, "Under your watch, we will practice a large-scale nuclear attack in response to a nuclear attack by the enemy." On land, sea, and in the air, Russia's strategic nuclear forces readied and then launched cruise and ballistic missiles. The drills were a success, claimed the Kremlin. Since Russia invaded Ukraine back in February, there's been growing concern in the West about the scale of nuclear rhetoric from senior Russian officials, including Vladimir Putin. He's been dropping unsubtle hints that Moscow, in certain circumstances, would be prepared to use a nuclear weapon in Ukraine. The Kremlin leader repeated Moscow's recent allegation that Ukraine is preparing to explode a radioactive dirty bomb as a provocation. There is no evidence to support this claim. Western officials have dismissed it as a transparently false allegation.
Meanwhile, more than 70,000 people have now left Kherson in southeast Ukraine, according to a Russian-backed official in the city. The order to start evacuating was given last week as Ukrainian ground troops drew closer. Here's Paul Moss.
Ukraine's not making any bones about it. Their advance towards Kherson is becoming ever more difficult as winter sets in. The cold, the rain and ground riven by water channels all are hampering their progress. Russian troops, meanwhile, are digging in to defend Kherson. As one of the first places they captured in the invasion, losing the city would be hugely symbolic. But what of the civilians there? The occupying administration says they're being evacuated. Ukraine, however, claims many locals are being forced out of Kherson, perhaps being transported across the border into Russia itself.
Next to the United States, a high-profile Republican candidate in the U.S. midterm elections, Herschel Walker, is facing allegations from a second woman that he paid for an abortion. The former NFL star, who denies the claims, has been standing in Georgia on a strongly anti-abortion platform. From Washington, our correspondent Emma Vardy.
Herschel Walker is a well-known name in America because of his legendary sporting status and has been backed by former President Donald Trump. His stance on abortion has been unequivocal, opposing it in all circumstances. But he's faced repeated claims of hypocrisy, as two women have come forward alleging that he paid for them to have an abortion. The second woman spoke over Zoom directly to reporters at a press conference, claiming Herschel Walker had pressured her into ending her pregnancy and drove her to the abortion clinic. She said he did not deserve a Senate seat. Herschel Walker has denied the allegations, calling them lies.
Uganda's health minister says the number of confirmed cases of the Ebola virus has risen to 109, with 30 deaths. Jane Ruth Aseng said 6 children from one family in the capital Kampala had tested positive after a relative came to stay from one of the country's most affected districts and later died. Health experts warn as it spreads fast in the Ugandan capital, there's also a greater risk of Ebola reaching other countries. Rebecca Kesby has been talking to Dr. Craig Spencer, Associate Professor in Public Health at Brown University and an Ebola survivor himself. He told Rebecca more about the situation in Uganda.
The one thing that's a little concerning about this outbreak is that it's caused by a different species of the virus as the one that caused the 2014-2016 outbreak in West Africa that many people are aware of, the one ultimately behind 11,000 deaths and 28,000 cases. And that's worrisome because that outbreak forced us to create new vaccines and new treatments that were incredibly helpful in preventing ongoing spread amongst contacts and decreasing mortality of patients that were hospitalized with Ebola. We know that those vaccines and those treatments unfortunately don't work for this species of the virus, the Sudan Ebola virus, which is behind the outbreak right now in Uganda.
The authorities in Uganda are locking down areas. We think that they're being very strict about that. The country has handled Ebola before, but you know this area, don't you? Are they facing any particular problems, medical staff, training, PPE, that kind of stuff?
We've seen dozens of Ebola outbreaks in the past, including an increasing number over the past few years in Congo, in DRC multiple times, another one in Guinea. We see similar issues every time, which is if we don't involve the community early enough, then it's really hard to get their support for vaccination campaigns or to have people call when one of their family members is sick or to bring them to an Ebola treatment center. This is similar regardless of where the outbreak is and regardless of where we intervene. And a lot of this, unfortunately, is because the way that we often intervene is a biomedical imperative. We do everything we can to get virus out of communities without really understanding or putting the primacy on the fact that these communities see this as a socio-cultural phenomenon first. They understand that, potentially doing an unsafe burial may increase their risk, but doing so also is so incredibly important for them or for their family that it's worth the risk for them. So the most important and critical key early on is engaging those communities. That is happening in Uganda, but like every other outbreak we faced, you're going to see a lot of pushback, especially if that expands into bigger places like in the capital, Kampala.
The early symptoms, I think, of Ebola just are very flu-like, so you wouldn't necessarily know somebody had Ebola. But as you say, some areas of Kampala are very densely populated. Could that be a bit of a worry for the authorities there?
This absolutely could. This is what we saw in 2014, which raised a lot of alarm bells early on. There were cases in Gekadu around the confluence of Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone, but very quickly we saw cases in Conakry, the capital of Guinea, and then later in Liberia. That was the first time that we had a big urban outbreak. If we were to see something similar here in Kampala, that would absolutely complicate the response. It would make it a lot more difficult. It would raise the concern, of course, for spread internationally and into the surrounding countries, many of which don't have as much experience or capacity as Uganda in terms of responding to Ebola outbreaks in the past. This is something Uganda has done. It has testing capacity, has experience, but South Sudan, others in the region don't have the same experience, and that could be potentially catastrophic.
Dr. Craig Spencer, Ebola survivor and Associate Professor in Public Health at Brown University. Many countries around the world rely on imports of tea from warmer climes like China, Sri Lanka or India. Stand aside Darjeeling and Oolong, though, as a woman from Scotland has successfully brewed tea leaves grown at home from a plantation which could be the most northerly in the world. Our reporter Adam Harkus has been to one of the Orkney Islands to meet her.
They are thriving, despite the wind, the rain and the fact that tea plants just do not normally like this kind of condition.
Lynn Collinson has been tending her tea plantation on the Orkney island of Shaughnessy for 6 years.
We are standing here beside a miracle. It's tea growing out of doors in Orkney, in the probably the furthest north that tea has ever grown outside.
This first crop yielded 7 kilos of picked leaves, which produced just 1.5 kilos of finished tea. Mrs. Collinson calls it Norse Noir.
I've only got 65 packs of 15-gram portions of tea in packs, so I haven't got loads to play with. Oh, it looks delicious because it's so rich and black. Putting the leaf in a little brewing pot.
Water is added and left to brew.
Oh, there you go. Time's up. 3 minutes has passed. The tea has brewed.
In the cup, Orkney tea is a golden yellow. Slightly salty to taste, but sweet too. There's no need for milk or sugar.
No, it's just a beautiful thing in its own right. And it's lovely. And you wouldn't want to spoil it. This is what Orkney tea that shouldn't be possible to grow tastes like.
Orkney tea is small in scale, but this northern brew is certainly special.
Adam Harkus sampling a cup of tea on the Orkney Islands. And still to come.
A low-end motorcycle that costs $5,000 US. With the license fee on top of that, it's going to cost $20,000.
Motorcycle owners in Singapore having to pay significantly more to ride on their city's roads. The UN Secretary-General has told the BBC that unless countries reprioritise climate change, the world faces catastrophe. Antonio Guterres said the current global problems were distracting governments. A report by the UN has warned that the international pledges to limit rising global temperatures to 1.5 degrees are way off track. In fact, the world is heading for global warming of around 2.5 degrees. And all this less than 2 weeks ahead of high-stakes negotiations at the climate conference in Egypt, COP27. Our climate editor Justin Rolat has been talking to the UN Secretary-General in New York.
We have dramatic situations in the Ukraine, but this is the crisis of this moment. But climate change is the crisis of our lifetime, is the defining issue of today's world. So climate change remains a central priority in everything we do, and climate change must be a central priority for all governments, all companies, all cities, the civil society, everywhere. If we are not able to reverse the present trend that is leading to a catastrophe in the world, we will be doomed. And so this must be, for all of us, an absolute priority.
Do you think the governments of the world recognise that?
Not necessarily all of them at the present moment. It's very unfortunate that in many governments, the pressure of the difficulties of the moment, and I recognize those difficulties. You have inflation, you have the consequences of the war, you have high prices of energy and food, you have then social unrest linked to that. So there has been indeed a tendency to put climate change in the back burner, and that is why it is so important to strongly advocate to bring back climate change to the centre of the international debate and to the centre of the priorities of every political entity in the world.
So you would say that is the agenda for COP27, the summit in Egypt, is to bring that focus to the issue and get governments engaging.
COP27, the G20 meeting in Bali, the report that was published today shows that even taking into account the national determined contributions, which means the commitments made by governments all over the world, even taken into account those commitments as being met, we will still have an increase of temperatures of about 2.5 degrees.
So it isn't just that emissions aren't falling, they are rising and rising increasingly rapidly. Mr. Guterres, these new pledges mean the conference in Egypt is effectively dead before it's even begun, don't they? Countries just are not rising to the climate challenge.
It is true, and that is why this COP is so important. To rebuild trust, namely trust between North and South, between developed economies and emerging economies, and to regain ambition.
The UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres with Justin Rolat. You can watch or read more of that interview at bbc.com/news. Years of economic mismanagement have crippled the Lebanese economy, causing a shortage of cash, spiralling costs and a banking crisis. Now the authorities there say they can't afford to host the Syrian refugees that make up around a quarter of the country's population. In fact, they've begun sending them back in a move that's been strongly criticised by human rights groups. Our Middle East correspondent Anna Foster is in Beirut.
There are a huge number of Syrian refugees in Lebanon. It's hard to know how many, but it's at least 1 million. So what they're doing at the moment is picking the first groups to go back. 6,000 or so, we're told, have been sent back today. How they choose, well, it's difficult to know. It seems to be a fairly arbitrary process, and this is one of the problems. Nobody really knows how people are being selected, on what criteria, and whether those people are safe to go back. And that's really one of the underlying issues here. People are questioning whether or not the Lebanese government is actually doing this in a responsible way.
What's going to stop the refugees just coming back again?
Well, nothing. I mean, in theory, it's a very porous border. It's very easy to get across, and some of them might choose to do that. They might choose to return. It's worth saying, though, that life for Syrian refugees here in Lebanon is not good. They live often in big camps without the basics. They don't have many of the rights and privileges that Lebanese citizens have. They really struggle. I mean, one example as a case in point, I've spent the last few days looking into the cholera outbreak that we're having here in Lebanon at the moment that came came from Syria. And many Syrian refugees who are contracting cholera aren't going to hospital because they're scared that they're going to be asked to pay medical fees when they get there. Now, in theory, the UNHCR, the High Commission for Refugees, pay their medical costs, but it just gives you an idea that even if people have illnesses, they're scared of actually seeking help. So some of them may well try to come back. Some of them might choose to stay in Syria. Of course, life there is extremely difficult as well. I think the problem is trying to move people en masse, which is what the Lebanese government are doing, saying that the Lebanese economy needs this, that these people are essentially too much of an economic drain, trying to do it in such a big way, and when Syria is still in a state of conflict, is by no means a safe and stable place to go. This is really at the heart of the issue.
When governments talk about protecting borders, they're often playing to a domestic audience and trying to assuage concerns of people who live in their own countries. Is that really what's going on here?
It is to a certain extent, and it comes back to the economic crisis, as I was saying. You know, Lebanon is in a parlous state at the moment. There's barely any electricity from the national grid, maybe 1 hour a day. The currency has lost 90% of its value. 80% of the country or more live in poverty. So, yes, people look for someone to blame, and it's always very easy to blame the large number of refugees, and I think the government is to an extent pursuing that narrative. And of course you've got to bear in mind that Lebanese politics as well, you know, people very often vote by sect, which is what they did when we had elections here back in May. There still isn't a functioning government. It's still a caretaker government because nobody actually managed to form a government. So that is part of it, but it's only a small part of the bigger, more tangled, more complex story here.
Anna Foster with me from Beirut. We'll go to Singapore next, one of the most expensive cities in the world to live in. And it's just become even more costly to ride a motorcycle around the island's streets. There are caps on the number of vehicles allowed on Singapore's roads to prevent congestion there. And now the price of a decade-long motorbike permit has hit $9,000, as Rob Young's been hearing from João da Silva, who's there.
What they do is, I think twice a month, you can bid for a limited number of licenses, whether it's for a car or whether it's for a motorcycle. And obviously this has an inflationary effect on the price of vehicles. If you want to buy a motorcycle that costs, say, $5,000, you will be paying on top of that for a 10-year license that will cost, I believe right now, something like $9,000 or close to $9,000.
So the cost of the permit then is not determined by the government, it's a market rate, and because there's more demand, it's gone up.
That is correct. So like I said, it's an open bidding system. It happens twice a month for private cars, for motorcycles, and you know, if you own a car company, if you sell cars, you will have to apply for a license for each of the cars that you are selling. So obviously, you know, there's a limited number out there, and there's a lot of companies bidding for these licenses. So the prices keep going up. I believe that the price of motorcycles the price of the license for these motorcycles, and we're talking about a 10-year license, has gone up about 200% in 4 years. So it is very, very significant.
So how much have you got to earn then to be able to afford both the permit and the motorbike?
Let's say a low-end motorcycle that costs $5,000, $4,000. With the license fee on top of that, it's going to cost $20,000. And as you can imagine, that is quite a price to pay if you're a low-income worker working in the food delivery industry. So what happens is a lot of these workers will have to rent their motorcycles from rental companies. And of course, those rental companies will be increasing their rental fees as a result of these increasing license fees that they have to pay for the motorcycles.
João da Silva in Singapore. Scientists at the Technical University of Denmark have shattered the speed record for data transmission using a single light source. It sounds complicated, but bear with us. What does it mean? It could mean much faster internet and, crucially, much more energy efficient internet use, reducing the amount of electricity needed. Rebecca Kesby has been talking to the lead author of the research, Leif Katso Oxenloo, about what exactly has been achieved.
So we've managed to transmit 1.84 petabits per second using just a single light source to carry all of the data. And it shows that using just one light source, you can actually carry more data than the total global internet traffic.
Okay, I mean, that sounds really impressive, but for people like me, can you just make it even more simple? What's a petabit?
A petabit is 1,000 terabits, which is 1,000 gigabits, which is 1,000 megabits. So it's a million gigabits or a billion megabits. And I guess most people are familiar with megabits from their own home connections. Every single second, around 1 petabit per second is flying around the globe.
So to sort of put it in terms of where we are now, how does it compare to the speed of the normal way the internet works at the moment?
So usually today you use lasers to create a data channel. So lasers sends out light. Most people are familiar with a laser pointer, and you may have a red one or a green one. And then you use each color to add data on it. So it's sort of like turning on and off the light, if you will. So normally you would use thousands of lasers to arrive at a data capacity like this. But each laser uses power, electrical power. You know you need to put a battery in your laser pointer, for instance. So it's similar with the lasers that are used in telecom systems. They all need power, and power is a scarce commodity these days. So we really need to find out where we can save power on the internet. Every stone must be turned over to see if we can save a little bit. And with this single comb source, as we call it, it seems that we can actually save maybe thousands of lasers.
Wow, that sounds revolutionary. So this could be so much more efficient than things are at the moment. How's it been possible to send this much information through just one laser beam then?
Well, it corresponds to creating actually these thousands of laser beams. It just sort of comes out from this single optical chip. What we wanted to do was to investigate how much data we can put on it, just to see what is the strength of this thing. And it was just remarkable that we could just add more and more data, and it just kept working. And then when we could actually transmit so much data, then we had a lot of data points that we could compare a theoretical model to. So we could make a detailed model that we have faith in, and that actually predicts that you could transmit even more. I mean, 100 times more than we've already done. So the powers of this chip is really quite enormous.
So I'm just reading here that at the moment, the internet, apparently, this is worldwide, I'm just reading here, uses about 2% of the world's total electricity, and the internet traffic is growing by about 30% every year. If this works, as you say it does, that could be reduced considerably.
Yes, we hope so. I should just say that the internet is responsible for emitting about 2% of the world's CO2 emission, but the electricity consumption is closer to around 10% of the global electricity consumption. So it's quite significant.
Wow.
And the internet is growing. So that's why we really need to be sure that we can make more and more energy efficient communication technologies. And this is just one of the technologies that we hope we can improve on. There's a lot more work that needs to be done in the servers and data centers and all these other components that use a lot of energy. But as I mentioned, we can leave no stone unturned. We need to find out where we can save everywhere on the internet.
Live Katso Oxenloo from the Technical University of Denmark. And that's all from us for now. There will be a new edition of Global News to download later. If you'd like to comment on this podcast and the stories we decided to include, do drop us an email. We love hearing from you. The address is globalpodcast@bbc.co.uk, or find us on Twitter @GlobalNewsPod. This edition was mixed by Chris Hansen. The producer was Liam McSheffrey. The editor is Karen Martin. I'm Andrew Peach. Thank you for listening, and until next time, goodbye.
Hello, I'm Namulanta Kombo. I'm the host of Dear Daughter, another podcast from the BBC World Service. If you missed our first season, I had the idea for Dear Daughter after my own daughter Coco was born. I started writing her letters about things I wanted her to know. I was hoping to make her a kind of handbook to life. I asked my friends and family to write letters to Coco as well. And then I entered a competition that the BBC World Service was holding for new podcast ideas. And I won. Now, our podcast gets other people to write letters, not just for my daughter, but for all daughters. Last season, I had some amazing conversations with people from all over the world who shared their experiences and their wisdom with me. So now, for season 2, I need your letters. What do you want to tell your daughter about your own life? What would you want her to know about the world? Please write her a letter and share it with us. We're looking for letters about friendship, about how to find a partner, about the moments when you knew you'd got something wrong. Your advice, your hopes, your fears, and your jokes. I want to hear it all. Visit our website at bbcworldservice.com/Dear Daughter for more information on how to send us your letters. I can't wait to share our second season with you. See you soon.